The man with the piano request. The cafe was warm with the sound of quiet conversation, the hum of voices mixing with the soft jazz that played from the corner speakers. People sipped their coffee, tapped at laptops, or leaned over tables sharing stories. The air smelled of roasted beans and pastries fresh from the oven. It was a peaceful Saturday afternoon in downtown Los Angeles. Keanu Reeves had slipped inside quietly, wearing a plain black jacket, his hair slightly messy, his beard trimmed but casual. He liked small places like this, unnoticed corners where he could simply be without the weight of cameras or flashing lights. He ordered tea, found a table near the window, and settled into the silence. But then the door opened and the mood shifted. A man stepped inside, his clothes worn and stained, his shoes nearly falling apart. His hair was long, tangled, his face marked by weather and hardship. Some heads turned quickly, some looked away. A few customers shifted uncomfortably. It was clear he was homeless. The man's eyes searched the cafe, not for food on the tables, but for something else. In the far corner of the room stood an upright piano, old but still polished, placed there for guests who wanted to play. His gaze fixed on it. He walked slowly toward the counter. His voice was soft, cracked from hunger and exhaustion. Can I play the piano for food? The cafe grew quiet. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The barista looked uncertain, glancing at the owner. The owner frowned, ready to refuse. Then laughter broke the silence. Not cruel, but surprised, almost gentle. It came from Keanu, who had been watching the scene unfold. He chuckled softly, shaking his head, not because he wanted to mock the man, but because the request was so unexpected, so unusual, that it felt almost like a scene from a movie. "Play for food?" Keanu said aloud, his voice curious, not unkind. "That's something you don't hear every day." The homeless man turned his head, his eyes narrowing slightly as if ready for another insult. But Keanu's expression was not cruel. It was open, even amused in a kind way. The man hesitated, then nodded. "I don't beg," he whispered. "I don't ask for coins. But if you let me play, maybe I can earn something." For a long moment, silence filled the cafe. The owner sighed. "Sir, this isn't—" But Keanu lifted his hand gently. "Let him play," he said, his tone calm but firm. Everyone turned to look at him. Some recognized him now. The quiet man by the window was Keanu Reeves. Whispers spread quickly, but Keanu ignored them. His eyes stayed on the homeless man. The owner, caught between hesitation and the weight of Keanu's words, finally nodded. "Fine. One song." The man walked slowly to the piano. His fingers trembled as he reached for the keys. His hands were rough, scarred, but when they touched the instrument, something changed. The first notes were hesitant, soft as falling rain. But then, like a storm breaking free, the music rose. Powerful chords filled the cafe, flowing into delicate melodies that wrapped around the room like light. People froze where they sat. Conversations died. Even the sound of the coffee machine faded into silence. The homeless man's eyes closed as he played, his body swaying gently with the rhythm. His hands moved with skill that seemed impossible for someone who looked so broken. Each note carried both pain and beauty, as if his entire life poured into the music. Keanu leaned forward, his chest tightening. He had expected clumsy playing, perhaps a few simple tunes. But this was something else, something raw, emotional, breathtaking. A woman near the front whispered, "My God, he plays like a master." Tears welled in the eyes of another customer, her hand pressed to her mouth. The cafe was no longer a cafe. It was a stage, a sanctuary, a place where pain turned into art. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was deep, almost sacred. Then slowly, applause erupted. People clapped, some stood, some wiped tears from their faces. The homeless man opened his eyes, startled by the response. He looked as though he had forgotten where he was. Keanu rose from his seat, walking toward the piano. He placed his hand gently on the man's shoulder. That, he said softly, was no performance for food. That was a gift. The man's lips trembled. I only wanted to be heard. Keanu's voice was steady, full of quiet respect. You were, and you won't be forgotten. The cafe buzzed with awe, people reaching into their pockets, offering money, food, even hugs. The homeless man stared at it all in disbelief, tears cutting through the lines of his weathered face. Keanu stood beside him, his own heart heavy with something he couldn't yet name. He knew this was not the end of a moment. It was the beginning of a story that would soon test both of them, one of dignity, resilience, and unexpected friendship. The man behind the music, the cafe, was still buzzing long after the last note faded. Some customers clapped again, others stepped forward to press bills into the homeless man's hands, and a few simply stood silently, unable to speak. It was as if the music had reached places words could not. The man sat at the piano, his chest rising and falling as though the performance had drained him. His hands trembled, but not from fear, rather from the release of something long buried. He looked at the money being offered, the food placed beside him, and for a moment he seemed unsure if it was even real. Keanu stood close, watching with quiet eyes. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The man hesitated, then lowered his gaze. "Samuel," he whispered. "Samuel." Keanu repeated gently, as if anchoring the name back into the world. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Samuel's eyes flickered with something distant, almost painful. "Long ago," he said. "When life was different, when I had a home, when I had a piano of my own. I studied, practiced, dreamed. But dreams don't always survive." The cafe fell quiet again. People leaned in, drawn not just by his music but by the mystery of his words. Keanu did not push. He simply pulled out a chair and sat beside the piano. "You have a gift," he said. "A gift like that doesn't disappear, no matter how much life tries to bury it." Samuel's lips curved into a bitter smile. "A gift doesn't keep you warm at night. A gift doesn't fill your stomach. People only see the dirt on my clothes, not the music in my hands." The weight of his words pressed against the room. Some customers looked down, ashamed, remembering how they had turned away when he first walked in. Keanu nodded slowly. "Maybe that changes tonight." As if to test those words, the cafe owner approached. His arms were crossed, his face unreadable. "That was impressive," he admitted. "You moved the room, but you can't just come in here expecting to play every time you're hungry." Samuel stiffened, shame flickering across his face. Before he could respond, Keanu stood. "Then let me cover his meals," he said firmly. "Any time he comes here, feed him. Send the bill to me." The cafe owner blinked, caught off guard. Whispers rose instantly. Customers exchanged looks of amazement. Samuel shook his head quickly. "No, I don't want charity." His voice cracked, filled with both pride and pain. Keanu placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "It's not charity. You played for all of us. You gave us something priceless. Let us give back." Tears welled in Samuel's eyes, though he tried to hide them. "I don't know if I can accept that." Keanu leaned closer, his tone quiet but unshakable. "You've been carrying this alone for too long. Sometimes strength means allowing others to stand with you." The words hung heavy. Slowly, Samuel nodded, his shoulders sagging as though a burden had shifted just slightly. The night wound down, customers leaving one by one. Some stopped to shake his hand. Some left food on the table beside him. Others simply whispered, "Thank you," as they passed. When the cafe finally emptied, only Keanu and Samuel remained. The piano stood silent now, its keys worn but glowing, faintly under the dim light. "You laughed when I asked to play," Samuel said quietly. Keanu smiled faintly, "Because I didn't expect it. But I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing at how surprising life can be. I didn't know you were about to change the whole room." Samuel's eyes softened. For the first time that night, his voice carried a trace of hope. Maybe I surprised myself too. They stepped outside together. The night air was cool, the streetlights casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Samuel clutched the small bag of food given to him, his posture still weary but less heavy than before. As they parted, Keanu said, "I'll see you again, Samuel." Samuel looked at him, unsure whether to believe it. "People always say that," he murmured, "but they don't come back." Keanu's eyes were steady. "I will." And though Samuel turned away into the night, his steps seemed just a little lighter, as if for the first time in years he was carrying more than hunger. He was carrying hope. What neither of them knew was that this simple moment in a cafe was only the beginning. Soon, the world would know the story of the homeless man with a piano. And soon, both men would be tested in ways neither could imagine. The past in the shadows. The next evening, the cafe was busier than usual. Word had spread about the homeless man who played like a master. People came not only for coffee, but to see if he would return. Whispers ran through the crowd, a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Samuel almost didn't come. He sat for hours on a park bench, staring at the food bag Keanu had given him the night before. His pride told him to stay away, that returning meant accepting charity. But his hunger pushed him, and a deeper part of him longed for the piano again. Music had been silent in his life for so long, yet for a few minutes yesterday, it had reminded him of who he once was. Finally, he walked back to the cafe. His steps were slow, his shoulders tense as if expecting to be turned away. But when the door opened, the room shifted instantly. Faces turned, eyes widened, and silence fell for a moment. Then, like a wave breaking, people began to clap. Samuel froze, stunned. Never in years had he been greeted with applause. He almost turned to leave, but then he saw Keanu sitting at his table by the window, nodding gently, urging him forward. He made his way to the piano. His hands shook as he sat down, not from fear of the keys, but from the weight of so many eyes. He began to play. The notes were softer this time, more cautious, yet still filled with aching beauty. The cafe grew still again, the world outside, fading. When he finished, the applause was louder than before. Some people stood, cheering. A young girl rushed forward with flowers, pressing them into his hands. Samuel's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. Afterward, as the cafe buzzed with conversation, a man approached. He was older, wearing a suit, his hair gray but neatly combed. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Samuel. "I know you," the man said sharply. "Samuel Layton. I remember that name." The cafe went silent again. Samuel stiffened, the flowers trembling in his grip. Keanu stepped closer. "You know him?" The older man nodded, his voice edged with both surprise and bitterness. Years ago, he was a rising star. Studied at a conservatory, played concerts, even recorded. People said he would be one of the great pianists of our time. But then, the man's tone hardened. He disappeared. Ruined himself. Gambling, drinking, debts. His name became a cautionary tale. Murmurs spread through the cafe. People leaned in, shocked. The applause that had filled the room only minutes before now faded into whispers of doubt. Samuel's face burned with shame. His eyes dropped to the floor. "Stop," he whispered. "Please don't." Keanu raised a hand, calmly. "Enough," he said to the man. His voice was soft, but it carried weight. Whatever happened in the past, tonight we saw who he is now. And what he gave us was real. The man frowned, muttered something, and walked out. The cafe remained quiet, caught between admiration and judgment. Samuel stood slowly, his voice breaking. "This is why I never play. This is why I stay silent. People don't see the music, they see my failures." He rushed toward the door, but Keanu followed, catching up to him on the sidewalk. "Samuel, wait." Samuel turned, tears streaking his face. "You don't understand. I lost everything. I ruined everything. I don't deserve applause. I don't deserve kindness. I deserve to be forgotten." Keanu's eyes softened. "We all have broken pieces in our lives. But music shows us we are more than our mistakes. You think people only saw your past? No, they saw your soul, and your soul is still alive. Samuel shook his head, his voice trembling. But what if they're right? What if I am nothing but a failure who wasted everything? Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. Then prove them wrong. Not by erasing your past, but by showing that it didn't destroy you. Samuel stared at him, breathing hard, caught between despair and the faint spark of something else. Hope. As the city lights flickered above them, he realized this was the first time in years someone had not turned away from his shame. But in the shadows unseen, a young man with a phone had filmed the entire exchange. By the next morning, the world would know not only of the homeless pianist's gift, but of the secrets he tried so hard to bury. And the storm was only just beginning. The video that shook the city. The next morning, the cafe owner woke to the sound of his phone buzzing non-stop. Messages, missed calls, and notifications lit up the screen. Confused, he opened one. It was a video already spreading fast online. The clip showed Samuel at the piano, his fingers dancing across the keys, filling the cafe with haunting music. The camera then caught the confrontation, the older man exposing his past, and finally, Keanu standing by him, defending his dignity. The caption read, "The homeless pianist and the Hollywood star who stood by him." By noon, the video had reached millions. Some praised Samuel's talent, comments filled with words like genius and gift and soul. Others focused on his past, mocking him, calling him a waste, a man who threw away greatness. The internet, as always, divided itself, half with compassion, half with cruelty. Samuel didn't know any of this when he woke on his park bench. He only knew the sun was bright and his stomach was empty. But when he walked back to the cafe, people recognized him instantly. Strangers stopped him. Some offering food, some asking for selfies, some shouting insults about his mistakes. Confused and shaken, he hurried inside. The cafe was packed, more crowded than ever. People stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting to see him. When he stepped in, applause erupted. Phones lifted into the air. Cameras pointed at him from every angle. Samuel froze. His heart pounded. This was not the quiet moment of music he had found before. This was a storm. Keanu, already at his usual table, stood and crossed the room quickly. "Samuel," he said softly, guiding him to the piano. "Breathe. Don't think about them. Just play. Let the music speak." Samuel sat down, his hands shaking as he touched the keys. For a moment he hesitated, but then, slowly, he began to play. The notes came uneven at first, broken by nerves. But as the melody grew, the cafe grew quiet. The storm of cameras faded into silence. When the song ended, the applause was deafening. People cheered, shouted his name, but then a voice rose above the noise. "He's a fraud," someone yelled. "He had everything once and threw it away. Don't waste your sympathy on him." The cafe grew tense. Whispers spread. Some people lowered their phones, unsure. Samuel's face burned with shame. He pushed back from the piano, ready to run. But Keanu stepped forward, his voice calm, yet firm, carrying over the crowd. "Yes," he said. "Samuel lost everything once. Yes, he made mistakes, but tell me, who here has never fallen? Who here has never carried regret? Does that mean we erase his music, his gift, his humanity? No. His story is not about failure. It is about resilience. And if we cannot honor resilience, what kind of people are we?" The cafe went still. The words cut through the noise, heavy and true. Samuel's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever defended him so openly. He had expected pity, maybe applause, but not this. Someone standing against the world's cruelty on his behalf. But even as the crowd softened, even as some clapped again, the storm outside grew larger. News vans were parking near the cafe, reporters gathering, headlines being written. Samuel whispered to Keanu, "I never wanted this. I only wanted food. I only wanted to play." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder, Sometimes life gives us more than we ask for. Sometimes it gives us a chance to rise. Samuel shook his head, his voice breaking. But what if I can't rise? What if I fall again? Keanu's eyes were steady. Then I'll be there to help you stand. And though those words calmed Samuel, the storm of attention was not done. Because outside the cafe, the man who had revealed his past was now talking to the press, feeding them darker stories, twisting the truth further. What began as a moment of music had now become a battle between shame and dignity, a battle the whole world was watching. The breaking storm, the days that followed, were unlike anything Samuel had ever known. One video had turned his life into a spectacle. Crowds gathered outside the cafe, some cheering for him, others mocking him. Reporters chased him through the streets, shouting questions about his past. Strangers pushed cameras in his face, demanding he play, demanding he confess, demanding he entertain them. Samuel tried to hide, but there was no hiding anymore. Everywhere he went, eyes followed. The same city that had ignored him for years now treated him like both a miracle and a scandal. Inside the cafe he played when asked, but each note felt heavier. His music was no longer just his own. It was consumed by an audience hungry for a story. The joy that had returned to him began to fade under the weight of judgment. One afternoon, after another long performance, he sat slumped at the piano. Keanu walked over quietly, setting a cup of tea beside him. "They don't want me," Samuel whispered. "They want the idea of me, the broken man who can play. They want to watch me rise or fall, but not to know me." Keanu sat across from him, his voice calm. "Samuel, people are complicated. Some will come for spectacle, some for kindness. But your music still reaches the ones who listen with open hearts. Don't let the noise drown out the truth." Samuel shook his head. "You don't understand. They're digging into everything. My debts, my failures, my family. I hear them say I abandoned everyone who loved me. I can't escape it." Keanu leaned forward. "The past is real, but it doesn't own you anymore. The world will try to chain you to it, but you can choose to walk free." Before Samuel could respond, a reporter pushed into the cafe, ignoring the staff's protests. A microphone was shoved toward him. "Samuel Layton," the reporter barked. "Is it true you gambled away your career? Is it true your family cut you off because you destroyed their trust? Do you feel guilty every time you touch the piano?" The cafe went silent. All eyes turned. Samuel froze, his chest heaving. His hands gripped the piano so tightly his knuckles whitened. Whispers rippled through the room. Keanu stood, his voice calm but sharp. "That's enough. This is not a courtroom. This is a cafe. Leave him." But the reporter pressed again. "The world deserves to know the truth. Are you a fallen genius or a fraud?" Samuel couldn't bear it. He rose quickly, his chair scraping the floor, and ran out of the cafe into the street. Cameras followed. Shouts filled the air. But he kept running until the crowd thinned and the noise faded. He collapsed, in an alley, his chest burning, tears running down his face. "Maybe they're right," he whispered to himself. "Maybe I am nothing but a failure." Keanu found him there minutes later, kneeling beside him. He didn't speak right away. He simply sat with him in silence, letting the storm inside Samuel's heart begin to settle. Finally, Keanu said quietly, "Do you know why your music moves people?" Samuel shook his head, tears dripping onto the pavement. "Because it carries your pain, but it doesn't end there." Keanu continued, "It carries hope too. That's what they hear. Not a fraud, not a failure. They hear a man who has suffered but still creates beauty. And that is something no scandal can erase." Samuel looked at him, his voice breaking. "But what if I fall? Again?" Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then fall, and rise again. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about never staying down." Those words sank deep into Samuel's heart, but the fear still lingered. He had been lifted once before in his life, praised as a prodigy, only to collapse into ruin. He feared history would repeat itself. Yet somewhere inside, a spark remained. Maybe Keanu was right. Maybe music was more than his mistakes. Still, as the city watched, the pressure grew. The world wanted a final answer. Was Samuel a fraud or a miracle? And that answer would come, not in whispers or headlines, but in one last performance that would change everything. The last performance, the city buzzed with anticipation. News outlets announced that the homeless pianist who stunned a café would perform once more, this time not in a corner, but on a stage offered by the community center. The hall was small but filled quickly, packed with strangers, journalists, musicians, and ordinary people who wanted to see with their own eyes who Samuel really was. Samuel almost didn't go. Fear gnawed at him. What if he failed again? What if his hands froze under the weight of so many eyes? He sat in the back of the cafe that morning, staring at the piano, trembling. Keanu sat across from him, calm as ever. "You don't have to prove anything," he said softly. "Play because it's yours. Play because music belongs to you, not to them," Samuel whispered. "But they'll judge me." Keanu leaned closer. "Then let them. Their judgment won't change the truth in your music." That evening, the hall was silent as Samuel stepped onto the stage. He wore a clean shirt someone had given him, though his shoes were still worn, his face lined with years of struggle. His hands trembled as he sat at the grand piano, so different from the upright one in the cafe. He closed his eyes, took a shaky breath, and placed his fingers on the keys. The first notes were soft, uncertain, but slowly the sound grew. Music poured out of him, not polished, not perfect, but raw, alive. Each chord carried the weight of his past, the pain of his failures, the loneliness of years spent unseen. Yet woven into it all was something else. Hope, fragile but unbroken. The hall grew utterly still. Even the clicking cameras stopped, as if the music demanded silence. People leaned forward, their eyes glistening. Some wept openly, some held hands, some simply closed their eyes and let the sound wash over them. Keanu sat in the front row, his gaze steady, his heart heavy with awe. He had expected beauty, but this was more. This was redemption set to music. As the final note lingered and faded, the hall was silent for a long moment. Then, suddenly, applause erupted. It rose like thunder, shaking the walls. People stood, clapping, cheering, shouting Samuel's name. Samuel bowed his head, overwhelmed. Tears streamed down his face. For years he had believed he was forgotten, broken beyond repair. Yet here he was, standing in the light, his music embraced again. Not because he was flawless, but because he was real. Afterward, reporters rushed forward, microphones outstretched. But before they could speak, Keanu stepped onto the stage and raised his hand. The room quieted. "Tonight," Keanu said, his voice calm but powerful, "you didn't just hear a pianist. You heard resilience. You heard a man who fell, who suffered, but who still carries beauty in his soul. We live in a world too quick to laugh at the broken. But tonight, the broken showed us what true strength sounds like." The crowd erupted, again louder than before. Samuel looked at Keanu, his lips trembling. "Why? Why did you believe in me?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Because I saw the truth in your music before the world did. And because every soul deserves someone to believe in them." In the weeks that followed, Samuel's story spread even further. But this time, it was not twisted with cruelty. It was carried with respect. People spoke not only of his past, but of his resilience, his courage, and the way his music touched hearts. Samuel still lived simply, still walked the same streets. But he was no longer invisible. He was no longer forgotten. He was a man who had turned humiliation into harmony, despair into dignity. And in quiet cafes, when strangers sat to listen, they didn't just hear a homeless man at the piano. They heard a story of survival, of kindness, of the way one small act, letting a man play for food, had rippled outward until it left the world in awe.